Welcome to TMI with Terrell and Martha. It's great to have you back. And this week we're going to do something we're going to do from time to time, which is update you on what's happening in the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Health and Human Services world. There's a lot going on in that area, Terrell.
Yes, I was able to read some of the information you sent me the other day. She is my news feed. So without Martha, I'm blissfully unaware.
Well, and it's really important. And we want, if you're watching this, for you to like and subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, put your comments in the section and be a part of what we're talking about. But there's, in the last several weeks, especially, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been in a lot of hearings. He has started doing some things at the CDC and in other places that have been controversial. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I was at a dinner earlier this week, and I met a longtime friend of mine by the name of Linda Chapman that has just been appointed as the accountant for the CDC. And I think what's exciting, I know a lot of you folks that are watching us maybe have friends or relatives or somebody that works for the CDC.
Yes. Oh, we have people at the spa whose children work there.
And they have had some challenges in the last few weeks. There was a shooting that happened nearby to the CDC, and a police officer was killed. And then they haven't been completely back to work yet. So there's a lot going on there, and we don't want to ignore that. But I think that what's happening here is a focus and a shift in focus on healthcare rather than sick care. And you're hearing him talk about that a lot.
Thing. Yeah. And, Martha, owning a wellness spa and being a personal trainer for the last 30 odd years, the keeping people well part to me was obviously the most, if you even thought about it as a common sense thought. Right? Better plan is prevention, right? Then if you're in need at some point, then you intervene with a stronger modality that would be, I would say, pharmaceutical intervention. But our country just got so turned around in how it was going to manage and support the population, because the medical doctors were having a specific direction in school. And I think it goes that far back and even further back in history.
Well, and I think their training has changed a lot. Okay.
Right.
And I don't think they do the business training they ought to do. And I don't think they do the basic nutrition. And I don't want to just say nutrition, but like, where do you start kind of training?
Exactly.
It's all about how many tests can you order, what kind of diagnosis can you come up with, and what drugs do you need to prescribe for that. And I had an old internist when I was growing up, our family doctor. His name was C. Warren Davidson. He had this office that was like from the 1950s in Decatur, which awesome. I loved because I loved the fact he didn't spend a bunch of money on his office. He
was old school.
He was old school. And after you had your exam, you went into his office and he had plain white paper. I'll never forget this, an ink pen.
Right.
And the first thing he would do is write out what you should be eating.
That's amazing.
That was the first thing he would do.
And that's how they started.
That the first thing you should do with a problem is try to fix what's going into your body first.
Exactly.
Now, obviously, if you've got a temperature or if you've got some other kind of symptoms, and yes, there needs to be some medical intervention, but there are lots of other problems that you need to start with what you're putting in your body.
Agreed. And, the doctors of those days, and I hate to say way back then because, how far back then do we go, really? But back in the day, the medical doctors, your primary care doctor, really treated the whole family. They didn't treat pediatrics and adults and everybody differently. The same doctor would generally take care of grandma, grandpa, the mom and dad, and the kids. He was a family medical doctor, and he was trained in all things food related, all things nutrition related, all things, he knew how to tell you to exercise and to eat better. And I think over time, something shifted, and that type training where they had all the things they needed to know to take care of an entire family started changing.
Well, and the technology and the pharmaceuticals are great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there have been a lot of lives that have been saved
today. Yes.
But I think we kind of need to look at this in kind of three ways. we're going to have to dispel the myth because it came up that Robert F. Kennedy is anti-vaccine
Right.
because he has made a lot of changes with the vaccine approval process. He has done a lot of different things, but what he found, and you know how I love my little triangles that I put, but what he found is that yes, there are scientists that are on
Right.
these boards, but the scientists have a relationship with the pharmaceutical companies. The pharmaceutical companies are now the ones, along with government, that are funding the research.
Right.
So it's not independent research in the same way it used to be. And then you've got this advisory committee. So what he's saying is that if you have a tie to one of these funding sources or something like that, then maybe you shouldn't be on this advisory committee.
It muddies the water.
Yes, it does.
It really is. It puts the question mark in there. And I think he's absolutely 100% right there.
And I like what he's doing in that way. And of course, he goes before the Senate Finance Committee and they start attacking him, kind of blaming him for these measles outbreaks and things like this. Now, folks, we had 22 million people come across the border in the last 4 years who were probably largely unvaccinated. I don't think that if there's some outbreaks of measles that in South Texas, that's to be blamed on the last 6 months of this administration.
No.
I think we have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of people came into this country that did not follow the same rules related to vaccinations for diseases we don't want to see anymore. Also, I know in certain places that used to be left-leaning places, now that Robert Kennedy's a Republican, they don't look at it that way. But there were a lot of crunchy granola moms that were questioning vaccines.
Right.
And I say to you, crunchy granola moms,
love you.
You should question the vaccines. Right. But you also have to know the difference between childhood diseases you want to prevent, like measles, mumps, rubella, that sort of thing, and whatever the latest, greatest vaccine is that hasn't been tested the way it should be.
Well, Martha, what I've seen from my views, and I'm very, I ride in the middle of the road for so many things because I have a very, very extensive viewpoint on how I look at this. And my concern is for this country, what I see is the baby being thrown out with the bathwater almost on every single point, right? So there's a little bit of truth. And yes, monitor what your children are being given. They're giving tiny infants a massive amount of vaccines before they even leave the hospital now, that they didn't used to do that before. Is that actually necessary? That's a good question. It's not a problem to ask the questions. Questions are good. But the problem is when you throw everything out, the truth goes with it. Right. And so when we're trying to sift through things and get to the meat and potatoes of it, slaying Robert F. Kennedy Jr. isn't going to solve the problem. Fighting for vaccines isn't necessarily going to solve the problem because a lot of them are probably overkill. And, as we saw with COVID, there was a lot of backlash from people getting the COVID shot because it didn't go through the same quality checks as our country usually puts in place.
Well, and that was another point that came up in this hearing that was important is that he has said, Secretary Kennedy has said that they are going to hold accountable the people that encouraged the lockdowns, that kept people, made up this 6-foot distance thing. I mean, Dr. Fauci is now on record saying, well, they didn't know for sure, but they were worried. His quote was, Americans weren't scared enough. And so they came up with this. And then the whole cloth mask thing, what we know now, and there is this picture out there from like 1918, a Georgia Tech football game, and everybody's got masks on because that was during the
Spanish flu.
Yeah. And they were literally fabric masks because that's all they had back then. They didn't have N95 masks, that kind of thing. So, this has been advice that's been given before, but you'd think in 100 years you might
come
update it a little
further.
bit. Yeah. So what we know now about masks is that the kind of fancy fashion masks and the paper mask didn't really work. But the
N95.
Yes.
And that's the one thing. But again, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's right.
Right? Like, yes, the N95 masks, those masks work. And those masks, the people in the hospitals, our healthcare workers wear those. If you want to make sure if you're in bad condition and you don't want to be around people that N95. The other things, they were just accessories, Really. And I think, us being thrown into a world pandemic really did a few things. It showed us kind of the best in humanity in certain cases, and it showed us the worst in humanity.
Well, and where I'm a little different than a lot of my conservative friends is I'm not looking for people to be charged or tried
No, I mean,
or any
nobody
of
knew
that.
what they were doing
What
with
I
it.
want is accountability.
Yeah.
I said at the very beginning of the pandemic, I don't hold anybody responsible for what they did the first few months of the pandemic because we
Right.
just didn't really know what we were
Everybody
dealing
was
with.
scared.
But
Yeah.
once we started getting data that no, we weren't going to have 2.5 million people die by August, we had 165,000, which is terrible, but it's a lot less than 2.5 million. So maybe you don't need to hit, what is it, the fly with a hammer or whatever it
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
Maybe you could
Yeah.
adjust some things so that the populations that needed help. That's all I'm asking. I'm asking for real science. And this idea that science never changes, science always changes.
That is science.
The thing about
That,
the scientific method, and this is what you always should question people when they say, oh, the science or 97% of people agree with this or that. Is the data repeatable?
Right.
If you can take that science and another scientist can
Over and over
repeat the
again.
same thing,
Mhm.
then that passes the scientific method.
Right.
If they can't repeat the process, then you need to keep looking.
Right.
That's
Well, what's interesting is that, we were sitting in a situation with COVID that we're still facing consequences from all the decisions, all the things that we chose to do personally and as a country and as a world for that matter. We're still all facing the consequences for it now. So I think the best plan of attack, I would think, is to, look at it from a perspective to where we can glean as much from that as we can so that we can make the positive changes that need to happen, right? And yeah, people made big mistakes. They messed up. They made bad decisions. They lied to us. They eroded the truth to the American public. But did they even know the truth? They like to claim they know the truth, but anyone that says they know the truth, period, God may beg to differ,
That's right. That's right. But I think the biggest issue that he's talking about, and I think the most important one, well, there's two. One is the preventable diseases that adults have. And those are tied back to things like lifestyle and things like that. And that's certainly something we should care about. The second thing and the most important thing is childhood diseases.
Right.
Okay, so he made the point that when his uncle was president, John F. Kennedy,
Mhm.
3% of children had chronic healthcare problems. Now it's well over 50%.
Oh, it's out of control.
That have chronic
Yeah.
healthcare problems. And it almost seems like people want to have some label for every little thing that's wrong with their child. And I think that we need to be a little more open to the fact that maybe what a child just needs to do is grow up
Yeah.
in the most healthy way possible. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, if your kid has cancer, if your kid has some other kind of disease, but the kind of young people and children that have diabetes,
Yeah.
and I'm not talking
That's
about type
preventable.
1.
Type
I'm
2
not-
diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes is
absolutely
completely preventable. So one thing I'm cheering Robert
Right.
Kennedy about is the research he's doing on childhood diseases
Right.
and what we need to do related to that.
And how we can help the population, right? Because basically what has happened is our government has created, and I hate talking this way, but I'm going to do it because I've got my good friend here. But the government has created entitlement programs to help people. But in that process, they've kept them prisoners to the system,
Yes.
right? So the problem goes way deeper than just,
Well, at all
changing
levels,
that.
if you don't have a code, you don't get paid.
Right.
Okay, at all levels of healthcare.
Insurance,
Yes.
all of it. It is outdated. It's broken. And it shows in the real science, Martha, in the real numbers of what our country looks like as far as its health goes.
Right.
This is a wealthy population. We are further along than most countries. What on earth has happened? And why can't we just all agree to fix that and really start kind of at the basics? Like, people that may need a help and a hand up from the government. Why don't we work them into a system where they can buy organic foods, healthier foods? most of the programs allow for them to buy boxed foods that are non-nutritious, nasty foods,
Oh, I
right?
tell you, I will
You
never
know,
forget the day I was stopping at a gas station in a kind of shady area,
right.
and there was a little girl in front of me in line that had an EBT card in her pocket, and she was buying like pork rinds and Fanta orange soda
Yeah, that should be
and
a
paying for it
no-go.
with that. And again, I have no problem with people that need food assistance. I have no problem with any of that. But I think that just like you can't buy alcohol with
Right,
your food assistance,
right.
you shouldn't be able to buy
Food that's
highly
killing you.
processed foods from a convenience store. And again, no offense to my convenience store friends. I know that those of you that lobby for the convenience store, we're going to hear from you. But I'm just saying that it should not be the main place. Now, that addresses another issue of food deserts and things like that, where you don't have the access to
To quality
food, to
foods.
good foods
Right,
in certain areas,
right,
okay, grocery stores and things like that,
right,
and farmers markets and
right.
that kind of thing. And that's something we can handle locally.
Yeah.
Okay, the government doesn't have to do that, but they have to make it a little easier sometimes to
They
be able to
do.
sell things. I think the funniest story I read recently was how one of the ways that Elon Musk was able to get the Amish out to vote for Donald Trump, that's like 70,000 Amish, because
Wow.
it was two things. It was one, he found out they couldn't drive a bus, but they could ride in one. So he was able to get them to the
He
polls.
bust them.
But they were
Wow.
mad because the government was coming in and telling them that they had to change the way they were farming in order to call themselves organic. And if Amish farmers are not
Right.
organic
I
farmers,
don't know who is
I
at
don't
that
know what
rate.
is. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? They don't
Yeah.
use
Well,
machines.
these
They don't use.
labels, all these labels and all this forcing the farmers to do
Yes.
things, that is to me beyond the scope of practice for the federal. I think that people need to be able to have the freedom and the choice to be able to grow their food the way they want to and sell it in the little farmers markets at a certain level and let the local communities decide, where that goes. But, the food problem goes all the way back to the seed issue and the marketing and the different large corporations actually putting patents on seeds. And, when Monsanto owns seeds, then and if those seeds in a Monsanto farm blows into a private local farmer's crop and those seeds grow from there, guess what? They lose their rights to all their food. And so, like, there's so much that needs to change relative to how we're operating so that we can get back to the whole foods, to the good foods, to being able to just farm and grow healthy food. But the things we've talked about with our guests, the amount of nutrients that are gone from the soils. We'll have Farmer Phil on at some point, who is one of our local farmers, and he can tell us how he rotates his crops and how he raises his animals. And it's a natural farming process. Why can't we get back to something like that?
Yeah, I think that's important. And I do think that as far as HHS is concerned, it's a huge, we're talking a lot about the nutrition side,
Right.
but also Medicare is in that world. Medicaid is in that world.
Yes.
Okay. And it's really important when we look at what we're spending. It's not the case that we don't spend enough on healthcare. We spend about 3/4 of the federal budget, about half of the federal budget
I
goes
understand
against
that.
some kind of healthcare program, whether it's veterans or Medicare or Medicaid or any of those kind of things. It's not the case we're not spending enough. It's the case that we're not spending it smart. And
That's right.
and we need to
Yeah.
change things as we go. And as we learn things, we need to change things. So,
Yeah.
that's what we have to do. And my judgment is still out about RFK. I think all in all, what I'm seeing so far, I like. He's focusing on the
Yeah.
issues like childhood obesity,
Mhm.
childhood health care, which I think is really
Yep.
important.
Yep.
Focusing on health care over sick care is really important.
It's the
I
key.
think that as he gets into some of the laws that are going out related to making sure that the people that are using our systems, whether it's Medicare or Medicaid, that they are entitled to that, because we don't want to spend dollars on people that aren't entitled to it if they can be out working and not needing that process.
I agree, but here's my thought, because I have a very personal relationship to this. When Savannah was fighting for her life. We had to basically divorce her so that we didn't go bankrupt.
Right.
Okay. Some of her medication was so expensive, but without it, she would absolutely die. Okay. This was the most terrifying time in my life. And so we ended up having to put her on
Medicaid. Probably. Yeah.
And she got Social Security. And but just trying to get to that point was horrendous. Thank goodness for CHOA and for the social workers
They
that
knew
help
how
the
to
parents
interact.
do
Yeah.
that. Right. But we were looking at devastation if we didn't get her put in that situation.
Well, and I have
and
friends
we
of
are
mine.
not poor,
Oh,
but
and
by any means.
I have friends of mine who have had special needs kids.
Mhm.
Not a short-term situation like your thing with Savannah was, but an ongoing, lifelong situation. Same kind of situation. They've had to be able to access Medicaid, and that's really the whole point of what they've done with Medicaid is
Mhm.
that they want to make sure that you don't have illegal immigrants on Medicaid,
Right,
that you don't
right.
have people that are able-bodied and could work.
But
You
riding
know,
the system.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the big thing is I don't see what the problem is with saying, okay, if you can work, or you at least have to show that you're trying to find work if you're able to.
Can I tell you my experience with that?
Yes.
I feel like the systems, the entitlement systems need to change.
Yes.
They are broken. And when I say that, it leads to what you're saying. But what happens is this country, somewhere, someone designed this to keep people in the system on purpose. And now they're pissed because people are in the system for long periods of time that really don't need to be. But here was my experience. I had a child who turned 18. So she was in a
Technically
children's
an adult.
hospital, thank God. But she was also technically an adult. She was a leukemia survivor, but she was also a survivor of a stroke, which left her with some difficulties moving forward in an adult world. Her
Right.
left frontal lobe, you get all kinds of stuff going on there. But she wanted more than anything to be a productive adult in the world. And the way that the system was designed, she would get some income, right, to take care of her needs through the system. She needed to show that she was trying to get a job, which she did, right? Because they really don't, but she also had disability. But the problem is the minute she found a job, even though it was not even enough to pay rent, it wasn't enough to pay for a week of groceries. It was just a general job that she got to start making herself feel better. They took everything. They took all the support, every dime of the support. And I thought to myself, what on earth are they doing? This is the problem because these people won't go out and get a job.
Exactly.
If they
right.
can't get a job that makes them enough money, we should step back what they earn. We should say, okay, we know you need a helping hand. We know you've had some hard times. You're sick. You're coming off disability you want to make for yourself. Go find a job and we'll assess what you need here so that you and reward them for doing the things we want them to do and not taking everything.
And I've advocated for that for years.
Yeah.
It ought to be a sliding scale.
Yes.
It ought to be a sliding scale because you're taking a group of people. This isn't the truth. This isn't what happened with your daughter because she was temporary.
Right.
But you take a group of people that are used to having help.
Yes.
And then immediately, boom. And so I agree with that.
They don't want to get a job on that basis.
There ought to be a sliding scale.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, tell me what
is
you think.
Is anybody listening to us here?
Yes,
yeah.
I think they hear it.
Yeah.
They hear it. So here, let me ask you this question, since we're going to go down this road. There are people that make their living encouraging older people to divest of all their stuff before they die so they can go on Medicaid to take care of things. And it's, to me, because you can't have more than $10,000 in assets. So there might be an older person living in a home that maybe only has $20,000 a year of income, but they own their home.
Right.
But that's where they live. And so that becomes for the people that help, that becomes too much.
That's
for them to have.
crazy.
So I think you're right. We need to
Fix it.
redo these systems for the 21st
Look at the
century.
practicality
Yes.
of it. Look at ways to encourage people and reward them for improving their life, taking some classes, getting a trade, going to work, And so instead of taking everything from them and enforcing them then to stay on the government teat, as you would call it, you can then reward them for not doing that. And then it's easier to see who's really riding the system and
Well,
who's not.
and I think too, though, that they have like started down that path
I
by
hope
what they
so.
did in the big, beautiful bill that Secretary Kennedy did support, where they starting out with able-bodied young men,
Right.
okay, and then also illegal immigrants that should not be on the program, period.
How would that
okay?
even happen? That's
Because
other questions.
states allowed it. States actually, the money is block granted to the states, and the states administer the program. Now, they're supposed to administer it based on, guidelines that the federal government gives, but they have a lot of leeway. And that's a good thing, okay? But it can be abused, just like every opportunity. There's a good
All
side and a
things
bad
can
side.
be abused,
Yeah.
really. If someone is wanting to abuse a system, they're going to abuse it no matter who they are.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
They're going to set out to abuse the system. They'll find a way.
So all in all, I'm really encouraged. I
Good.
think that I'm going to be watching really closely what happens with Medicare. Dr. Oz is heading that up.
That's crazy.
Which is
That's
interesting.
just I'm sorry, but that's just like, it sounds so crazy.
It does.
He was on the TV when I was growing up.
But you know what's funny about
But that's
that?
kind of cool.
He's a thoracic surgeon. He was top of his class.
Yeah.
Thoracic surgeons are like the top of the medical profession.
Right.
So he's got the chops. Just somewhere along the way, somebody thought he'd be good on TV. And then he had this whole TV career.
The USA
that
is
USA
becoming quite the TV
It
show.
It is. And then, of course, we've got the FDA is headed up by Dr. Marty Makary. And Dr. Marty Makary is a Johns Hopkins trained physician. He is a research physician as well as being a practicing physician. And I'm very encouraged about what I'm seeing there.
Oh, good.
So, look, I would just say that what's frustrating to me is hearings where you should really get information have become performative.
Yes. And they just yell at each other.
They just yell
say
at each
mean
other.
things.
They
and
do.
It's not
They do.
helping us at all when
They
they
do.
do that.
And I wanted to just, in the kind of few minutes that we have left, to talk about Robert Kennedy. And just, this is not directly to his job, but he is the son of Robert Kennedy,
Right.
that was
Yeah,
assassinated
senior.
in 1968, and also the nephew of John Kennedy. And those of you may have followed the death of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
But Robert Kennedy was at the Kennedy Center for an event they were having to remember Charlie, and spoke very eloquently
wow.
about
I
his
missed it, but-
experience being a child of an assassination.
He had a very,
and
I just got goosebumps.
Yes,
Did
I
y'all
mean,
get goosebumps?
and so let's not forget when we're talking about these people that they're human beings.
Right.
They have a life story, that we shouldn't just assume that people want the worst because we disagree with them politically. And
no one is disposable.
no.
No one deserves to die for any reason. And I think that if we can get a beautiful display of this in our own government, all the way up to the top through the House, if everybody can start learning to just listen to each other, I think the reason we're so brokenhearted around Charlie Kirk is the fact that he actually put himself in harm's way on purpose. He knew what he was in for. He knew he was going to be hated and or loved, but he was willing to take the risk to say what he felt was the right thing.
And Secretary Kennedy said he was a relentless and courageous crusader for free speech, the most eloquent truth teller of our era, and he was silenced by violence. And then, of course, he called for prayer for Erica and Charlie's children. Then Kennedy goes on to say, Charlie is already in paradise with the angels. We ask his prayers for our country. And he goes on to talk about that. So I think that even as a 70-year-old man who was a child of he was 10 when his father was assassinated.
What a trauma.
To be able to bring that to something like that is really it's not something anybody wants to talk about. but it's important in these moments that the people that have been there share what they know. And I was very moved by that. And I could tell that even 60 years later, 58 years later, it was hard for him.
Yeah. I
You know?
mean, that is a trauma that no child deserves to live through. That is the worst of humanity. And I'm not talking just we had government officials, people who were working for people, right? The people murdered in their own homes. Now, they might not have been on someone's side of the political lane, but the fact is these people are putting their lives in danger just for trying to represent somebody's thought process, right? This country has to take responsibility. The people have to stop blaming each other. And I think that we need to start trying to figure out, and I think Charlie Kirk would agree, that we need to really start looking towards the humanness in people, and learning to be okay with someone having a different opinion and a different thought process, and debating and having conversations. I loved the prove me wrong. Prove me wrong that we don't need more humanness in our interactions with each other. Maybe if we just try listening and interacting and not allowing the anger and the hatred and the fear to be so stoked that we would take somebody's life who is trying to do something that he firmly believes in, or any of them. None of those people deserve to die.
Well, and what's so interesting too is that because Robert F. Kennedy's been a lifelong Democrat, he probably didn't cross paths with Charlie Kirk. But because he switched the Republican Party and started traveling with Trump,
right,
he got to know him pretty well in the last
year. Yeah, I bet
year.
he did. Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting example for what we're talking about a lot, is that walk in another person's shoes.
Right.
See their point of view.
Yes.
Don't just assume because changes are being made in organizations like the HHS that it's all wrong. And also, and this is going to sound a little harder than what I would usually say, is that there's got to be an understanding that when we have elections in this country, we elect an executive, whether
right.
it's a governor or a president or
right.
whatever it is. And if you don't go along with the policy of that particular executive, there's a possibility you will lose your job. It happened. The understanding when I worked for Senator Perdue is that if I worked in his office, but when he did not get reelected, if I had still been working there, I would have had to offer my resignation.
Yeah, because
it's a different person. Yeah. You've got to understand that. And that's not being unfair. That is just life. And that is the way it is.
It's basically what a democracy or our republic is about. It's about, first of all, everybody out there should be taking the responsibility to have the proper documentation to vote when it's time to vote. That's how we make real change. But when we do make that vote and we do put somebody in positions of authority that are there for our benefit, there is a huge responsibility on the part of each individual American to do their best to work with people who don't think the same way as you.
But I would say, too, the bureaucracy, and HHS is a huge bureaucracy.
Right.
It is the largest department, other than defense. It may be even bigger than defense as far as the money that's spent, because Medicare's in there.
I think it was said
it's
that
the
it
largest
is.
department.
Yes.
So here's the thing. You get there, you have a new leadership team. You disagree with that leadership team. What the bureaucracy used to allow you to do is you just waited it out until the next group of leadership came in, and you just kept doing what you were doing because it's a bureaucracy, right? I think what's exciting and unnerving for the people it's happening to is happening in HHS and other departments, is that the leadership's coming in and saying, this is our vision. This is how we're going to implement this vision. We would love for you to get on board. But if you don't, here's a severance package. Here's whatever. I was listening to an interview with the head of OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, and they're basically the personnel office for the federal government. We started the year with 2.4 million federal employees. Okay. we're probably going to end the year with 2.1 million federal employees.
Right.
So that's roughly about a 10 to 15% reduction and we did that through attrition. Everybody wasn't fired. We did it through attrition, through reorganization, and then also determining, like, for example, at HHS, they had 40 different communications departments within HHS. They have now combined that to where they have one for each entity. They've got one for FDA, they've got one for Medicare, and they've got one for the HHS proper, instead of 40 communications. So it's doing the things that every business should do and saying, we've got 40 people doing this same job.
Yeah. Are we spending way too much money doing this?
When it's our money. Okay. They have not $1 that we did not give them.
Oh, no.
Okay.
That's the whole point of the whole thing. Like we really should be the ones responsible.
So I say hooray to Robert Kennedy. I wish him to be successful. I'm going to question him along the way if I disagree with what he's saying. But right now, what I'm seeing in the defense of wellness and of children and of obesity and preventable diseases,
he's trying to make some major changes there.
And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If all we get out of this HHS is healthier food without additives, that the rest of us, he will have been a success. But I think he'll do more than that.
And those changes will be seen. We might not see those changes overnight. Yeah, those changes will be seen over time.
So I got to tell you a funny story, because I was going in to pay my taxes, because I pay quarterly taxes. And this is why I'm so radical about taxes, because I sit down and write a check once a quarter to the government for my taxes. Yeah. When you do that, you know, we get this false sense of security when you have a W-2 and you never see the money.
Yeah.
You know, when you have to sit down and write that check.
I've been there.
Something.
Yeah.
So I went into the accountant's office to give him the checks, and they always have this little bowl of candy in there. And normally it's chocolate. That's why I like it.
They should have Hershey's Kisses in there.
I like it because it's chocolate. This time they had Skittles, like fun-size Skittles. And the first thing I thought, are these Skittles before the red dye was taken out or after the red dye was taken out?
Oh, that's hysterical. Well, I could tell you for sure it is before the red dye was taken out.
Because they were probably on sale. That's why
they have not done that. It's not been really released, I don't think.
No. So we would love to know what you think about what we said today, because I think this has got to be a discussion. We have got to be able to talk about things that we agree with, that we disagree with, and then see the other person's point of view.
Right.
We want to know what you think about our discussion of Robert F. Kennedy, but we also want you to like and subscribe and let us know what you'd like to talk about.
And just so that everybody really does understand, hey, you know, they were talking a lot about politics today, and this is a wellness show, whatever. If anybody's feeling that way, please understand that Martha and I both realize that this level of information is directly going to relate to your wellness. And Martha and I both believe that your wellness deserves a little overshare.